You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the in our paper on this, it indicates that aid to Pakistan is divided into 5 different categories: economic growth, education, health, governance, and human assistance, as well as major assistance with the development of the FATA areas. Can you give me a breakdown of any of the 3 of you, whoever wants to jump in on this, with regards to these categories, the amount of money that we're spending in each one, the importance of that? Is one of higher importance than the other? You've pretty well touched on our problems with the FATA folks and the ability to use those funds. Yes, Dr. Fair.
Unfortunately, I don't have the money with me, but one of the things, and it pertains to the FATA issue that I've been particularly dismayed by, and I know Dr. Ahmed and I think Dr. Wilder have remarked upon this as well, is that the aid was never conditional upon encouraging the Pakistani government to change the constitutional structure that governs FATA. And one of the things that strikes me where USAID might be more effective is actually helping the Pakistani government make that transition. So, for example, while there are civil society organizations, the judicial system hasn't been linked to the rest of Pakistan because there's no right of appeal. There are no police in FATA. There are these highly unprofessional tribal levies, and of course the Frontier Corps is a paramilitary organization. It's always struck me that the more effective way of trying to reach FATA has actually been to incentivize the Pakistan government to incorporate FATA into the rest of Pakistan, as opposed to keeping it separate.
Is that where most of the money is going now, to the development of this area? I mean, does any of the money go to the rest of the Pakistani
there's a
people?
huge aid program.
Okay. What percentage then goes to the development of FATA's areas? Do you have any idea? Just
There's
roughly?
$750 million that's been going to FATA, and that's in addition to an additional security assistance program that's supposed to be aiming the Frontier Corps. So relative to the rest of the programming in Pakistan, it's actually relatively modest. But you know, it's interesting when you talk to Pakistanis, you know, because USAID can't be subtle about its aid objectives in FATA. So Pakistanis have this belief that we're largely only operating in FATA, and that fuels this additional conspiracy about the securitization of aid, that if you weren't in Afghanistan, you wouldn't care about FATA. So in other words, you don't care about Pakistan, you care about FATA because of the insurgency. But
what you're saying, though, is that that most of the money goes to other areas of Pakistan for economic growth, health, and other things like that. And my question, I guess, is how effective are we? And I mean, the FATA issue has been, dominating the discussion here. What about the rest of the aid to the rest of the country in the areas that it's supposed to go into, such as economic growth, health, governance, humanitarian assistance? Does it go to those areas? Is it effective?
Well, they don't know because they don't do those evaluations. And that's what I find so frustrating about USAID.
And when you say they don't do those evaluations, who are you talking about?
USAID really doesn't evaluate the impact of its programs. You know, they'll talk about how many skills they've built, but for example, there's no real meaningful measure of how the quality of education has been improved. So there's this tendency to focus upon outputs, not outcomes. And in fairness to USAID, evaluations are expensive, especially when conducted through institutional contractors. And at the risk of projecting self-interest, I think USAID should be partnering more with the academic community because they have more luxurious timelines, they have a more competitive cost structure, and they actually have the academic expertise, and I'm talking about quantitative analysts in particular, to help them isolate the impacts of their programming upon outcomes. And so the other alternative to think about is actually partnering USAID with programs, for example, like what Dr. Wilder does, as opposed to relying upon these institutional contractors. I've seen institutional contractors grade other institutional contractors' homework. And when there's a limited corral of these contractors, it's pretty easy to tell who's done what analysis. And it's just game theory. You know, everyone's basically going to say that every program did more or less a good job because they don't want to then be subjected to a negative critique by another institutional contractor for their programming. So
what you're saying is there are no measurable, there's been no measurement of the outcomes of the programs to date with regards to the other folks here with regards to economic activity, health. In other words, there's been no discussion of how many shots have been delivered, how many more doctor visits, how many people have been taken to the doctor, how many, whether the birth rate has increased or whether the cause of other diseases have gone down. None of that's been quantitatively measure?
Well, you can measure outputs. Like, they can say how many schools they've built, how many teachers they've trained, but they can't talk about outcomes, which is the quality, for example, of the education. The other problem is that because they don't randomize interventions, so for example, right now they're really focusing on particular districts that are affected by insecurity. So it's going to be, since we're putting more money into more insecure areas, and this is what Dr. Wilder talked about, we're always going to have a causality that more insecurity is correlated with more money being spent. And it's very difficult to disentangle that because they're not putting money into areas that are least secure. So in other words, if they were to randomize their intervention, they could actually isolate the effect of the intervention. But for political reasons and for mission-driven reasons, they don't feel that they have the luxury to do that. But yet it's absolutely essential to generally determining the impact of an intervention.
Okay, thank you. I see my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.